Hello and welcome to SpyHards Podcast. For the next hour, your hosts will go deep undercover into the world of spy movies to decipher which films make the NOC List. But remember, this information is strictly for your ears only. I'm Agent Scott.
And I'm Cam, the provocateur.
Cam, what are we looking at this week?
We are going to take a look at the 2015 version of The Man from U.N.C.L.E, directed by Guy Ritchie, an adaptation of the 1960s TV series starring Robert Vaughn.
Now, our tried and trusted method so far has been to read the synopsis from letterboxd.com. So away we go. The Man from U.N.C.L.E. Saving the world never goes out of style. At the height of the Cold War, a mysterious criminal organization plans to use nuclear weapons and technology to upset the fragile balance of power between the United States and the Soviet Union. CIA agent Napoleon Solo and KGB agent Ilya Kuryakin are forced to put aside their hostilities and work together to stop the evildoers in their tracks. The duo's only lead is the daughter of a missing German scientist, whom they must find soon to prevent a global catastrophe.
That sums it up pretty well, I think.
Yeah, that's a bit of a mouthful, but doesn't give you too much. It sort of gives you the first 10 minutes of the film, really. Yeah,
it's not the War and Peace that was The Bourne Identity.
No, it actually flowed quite well. It didn't have a pause in the middle where you just thought it had ended.
Thought or hoped?
You're that bored of my voice already.
It's only episode 4.
I'm done with you. We're finished. So, Cam, before we get into the background of the film, off the bat, what are your initial thoughts about it?
I will say, I'm not the world's biggest Guy Ritchie fan. So I've enjoyed, I think, like most of the world, Lock, Stock, and Snatch, his 2 big early crime dramas, comedies. I really enjoyed those. They have that sort of Tarantino style. But since then, I've always felt like Guy Ritchie has kind of wandered down some curious paths. I'm not a fan of his recent films like King Arthur or Aladdin, or even really the Sherlock Holmes films. But this one, I remember really thinking it was a little bit of cut above that. I really enjoyed the style here. It felt like a natural place for him to take that kind of oddball style he carries from movie to movie. And I think it's a charming, fun movie. Is it maybe a little inconsequential? Possibly, but it is fun. So I'll say that right now.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. I hadn't seen this film before I watched it for the podcast. And so I was going completely fresh, which I quite liked. And I just enjoyed it as a piece. I think it was quite a funny film. I don't know much about Guy Ritchie apart from Snatch, Lock, Stock, etc. because they're basically British staple films. Everyone's here seen those films. And we'll walk around quoting Snatch. But no, I really enjoyed it. I didn't know much about the original TV show either, because I think it was just before my time. So I had no idea, and I found it a really enjoyable movie.
That's good.
We've got that. Now, what we usually do is take a look at the background of the film. So, Cam, what do you know about it?
Okay, so The Man from U.N.C.L.E. Came out in the summer of 2015. It had a budget of $75 million, which is actually fairly low for this type of movie, especially a movie opening in the summer. Domestic, it made $45 million, international $62, for a worldwide total of $107 million. So no one got fired, but this was not a hit.
That's it. I don't know whether that's a thumbs up or a thumbs down, really. It's, again, not a big money maker, but it didn't sound like it lost any money. But it just feels like these days studios want these Avengers Endgame type box office hits every time.
Yeah, generally when they're looking at worldwide numbers, usually they say 400 is the line you have to cross to get a sequel, but 300 something's okay. And this did 107, so meh.
Tell that to Star Trek Beyond. Still waiting for the 4th one.
No kidding. And I mean, Guy Ritchie previous to this had done the 2 Sherlock Holmes movies, which were huge international grossers, especially. So I think this was a little bit of a disappointment for him. As for the year, the top 3 movies worldwide, number 1 was Star Wars: The Force Awakens, which made like $2.1 billion. So believe me, it was well outside of the realm of The Man from U.N.C.L.E.
Which I think is a bit of a shame, really.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
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 I certainly remember seeing Star Wars that year, but I did not go and see The Man from U.N.C.L.E. So I didn't help this either.
I did. I helped a lot. But the
I went 10 times.
They finally had to take it out because I'd worn out all the prints.
You were the man from U.N.C.L.E.
That's right. The only one, frankly. And number 2 was Jurassic World. And number 3 was Furious 7. So once again, we have entered an era of nothing but sequels, remakes, and well-known IP being on the top 3. Ultimately, The Man from U.N.C.L.E. was number 66 for the year, right between Vacation, the reboot of National Lampoon's Vacation, and the Shaun the Sheep movie, which I think we're covering that next week, right, Scott?
Next 4 weeks in a row, actually. We're breaking it down to a 4-part series.
Shaun the Sheep, by the numbers.
Bar the numbers.
And so there was actually a lot of spy movies this year. You remember when we talked about The Bourne Identity, I said 2002 would be the big spy year we'd be revisiting over and over. Well, it looks like 2015 will also be a well-visited year. So here's a list of the movies that beat The Man from U.N.C.L.E. At number 6, you had Spectre. At number 8, you had Mission Impossible: Rogue Nation. Number 18, you had Kingsman, the first one. Number 33, you had the Melissa McCarthy film Spy. And at number 44, you had the Spielberg film Bridge of Spies. All movies that we will cover in the future. And at number 85, we had a movie that I think we have to debate whether this belongs in this series. But at number 85, we had Hitman Agent 47.
As in from the video game Hitman franchise.
Yeah, there's 2 of them. This was the second one.
I didn't even know that they did films.
They did, yeah.
That's a show I didn't go see it.
Yeah, I don't think many people saw the Hitman films, really. A couple other notables that I'll just mention. This was the big year for Alicia Vikander, the co-star of The Man from U.N.C.L.E. This was her big coming out year, and she was everywhere in 2015. So she had this movie at number 66. At number 97, she had the independent drama The Danish Girl, for which she won the Oscar that year for Best Supporting Actress. And at number 140, she had Ex Machina, which was one of my favorite movies of that year. And I think the best performance she gave. I think I would have given her the Oscar for that one.
That was where I knew her from. Of the 3 you've listed, I think that's the only one I've actually seen.
Right. And also Elizabeth Debicki, who's the villainess in this film. She appeared in the movie Everest, which was like a wilderness drama, at number 38. I did see it. It was all right.
So, Cam, how did this film end up on the screen? Because I heard it was quite a long gestation period for it.
Yeah, The Man from U.N.C.L.E. was in development since the 90s. I'm guessing in the wake of movies like The Flintstones, The Fugitive, The Brady Bunch movie, there was a real appetite to translate as many TV properties as possible to big screen movies. This was on the list at Warner Brothers, but it just never really came together. They've said that they figure they had 12 to 14 scripts written for this adaptation, and it kind of just went nowhere and sat dormant until about 2010 when Steven Soderbergh, the Oscar-winning director of Traffic, he also did Erin Brockovich, as well as Contagion. He works a lot. He makes a lot of really cool movies. He did the movie Haywire, which we'll probably cover on this podcast. He signed on to do it. And at that point, George Clooney was attached to star. And Soderbergh and Clooney had worked together on the Ocean's 11 films. And so it felt like a natural transition for the two of them to go and recreate a spy film, which could be really cool because Ocean's 11 really did the cool stuff very, very well. And it sounds like Soderbergh, just mostly left over budgeting. The studio wanted to pay less than $60 million. That basically 60 was the top of the bar, but they wanted less than $60 million. And Soderbergh was looking at it as a 3-part series that would hop the globe each movie. And when you hop the globe, that gets expensive.
Just look at the Mission Impossible films.
Yeah, exactly. They're not cheap. They're not 60 million productions.
No.
And so George Clooney was the original choice to star, but he ended up dropping out of consideration due to injuries. He just had some sort of sports injury that he just felt would prevent him from doing this movie properly. And basically at this point, they looked at every male actor who could possibly star in this movie. Like they looked at Channing Tatum, Bradley Cooper, Ryan Gosling, Leo DiCaprio, Robert Pattinson, Matt Damon. Basically go down the list. They considered them. Johnny Depp, John Hamm, Russell Crowe. It's pretty much everyone at least probably took a meeting or was on a list somewhere as a potential lead for this movie. But ultimately, they ended up casting Henry Cavill after Tom Cruise fell out. Tom Cruise had signed on basically to do it, but dropped out because Rogue Nation's scheduling got in the way.
Good choice.
Yeah, exactly. So Armie Hammer was cast opposite Tom Cruise, but when Tom Cruise dropped out, that's when Henry Cavill jumped on. Another casting choice that almost was the Elizabeth Debicki role. They were eyeing also Rose Byrne and Charlize Theron. I have to believe Charlize Theron just wasn't interested because I think they probably would have cast her if she'd been available.
I would say it seems a bit below her, but then she's also taken a turn in the Fast and Furious films now. So
that is true. Yeah.
It does seem like the same character a little bit.
But this was a 2015 movie. So 2015, she puts out Mad Max Fury Road. And I feel like that was probably the effort that may have taken up that scheduled time. I'm not sure because that had such a long post-production, but I would never want to do anything to risk my precious Mad Max Fury Road.
No, I think that was a good choice on her part too.
Right. So ultimately what happened was Guy Ritchie jumps on this movie after Soderbergh exits, and he brings on his writer, Lionel Wigram, who produced the Sherlock Holmes movies as well as the Harry Potter franchise, beginning, I think, with the third one. And Ritchie and Wigram co-wrote the script for this film. Ritchie said the script was in flux through most of the production. He likes to work that way. We talked last time about Doug Liman, how he kind of likes to find his movie. And Guy Ritchie sounds pretty much the same kind of idea. He really does like to kind of find the movie. Henry Cavill has said they improvised a lot of the lines in the movie. So I think this was a fairly loose production and probably not maybe the clamped down approach that, a different filmmaker would have taken.
I can see the actors having a lot of fun with this sort of loosey-goosey approach, but I can imagine a lot of the crew just screaming as they just mess around with framing of scenes and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you can tell that this movie was like a long-term production because when you look at the story credits, there's 4 story credits, 2 of them to Ritchie and Wigram, but there's also credits to someone named Jeff Kleeman, who was a TV producer, and David C. Wilson, who wrote some action movies back in like the 90s and very early 2000s, and then has not worked since. So I would say that they were taking some story material from those earlier drafts along the way. And then working them into this movie. Okay,
folks. So before we get into the sort of meat of the film, we did also set an additional challenge for ourselves and yourselves of watching the original first episode of The Man from U.N.C.L.E. from the 1964 TV show. I believe The Vulcan Affair was the name.
That is correct. It was fascinating.
Oh. Now, we did take up the challenge, and we will also sort of review that later on, and also you sort of compare and contrast on our way through. But we just wanted to make sure that you all, if you hadn't heard last week's episode, don't be surprised if we're going to talk about the pilot as well.
Right.
All right, Cam, so let's get into it. You said you enjoyed the film a little bit. You didn't really give me too much from your initial thoughts. So just let's tuck into a bit more. What did you think?
Yeah, so this movie is a really good example of style over substance. When we talked about Bourne, when we talked about Goldeneye, when you looked at my notes, I had a lot of notes with asterisks next to them because it was like, ooh, this is a key thematic idea or something the filmmaker's trying to get across in this moment that I think is going to be really interesting to talk about on the podcast. Let's just say there's not a lot of asterisks in my notes on this one. Like, it really does feel like a lark. Like, it's just, Guy Ritchie was just like, I just want to have fun. And I do think that fun translates fairly well. I think the movie maybe gets a little bogged down in the latter half, which we'll talk about later. But ultimately, like, I love the style of this movie. And I liked his, basically, I guess, recreation of what seems like 1960s cologne ads. Like, it feels like that's half the movie to me, is just these very picturesque scenes of actors looking cool in front of, like, beautiful backdrops and just looking, like, way better than I will ever be in my life.
Yeah, the film certainly has a bit of a swag to it, I believe is the term we would use there. But it is cool at all times throughout the film, and certainly nowhere I could ever reach. I mean, Henry Cavill is I think, a cut above most male specimens anyway.
Yeah, he really makes us all just look very meek. It's
Yeah.
very frustrating, but I did enjoy that. Like, there's a real like distance that the two male leads have. Like, they seem a little bit removed from the action, almost, especially like Henry Cavill just seems to be commenting on everything that's going on, playing it so cool that it's just, I mean, it's a lot of fun to just watch him quip and basically just look at everything with a very detached eye. And so that sort of tone carries throughout the whole movie. And I do think that maybe is damaging to when the movie wants to be exciting, because when you have a character constantly basically being detached and above it all, it kind of gets in the way of raising actual tension in action sequences. But I do think it's really fun, more so just to hang out with the characters.
Yeah, I mean, you just look at the scene where Armie Hammer's character, Ilya, is trying to escape on the boat, and Henry Cavill's character, Solo, is just sat in the van eating a sandwich whilst it sort of happens in the background. That is funny for a second, but they hang in there for a while. You don't care as much.
I don't know. That may be my favorite sequence in the entire movie.
Oh, don't get me wrong. It was cool. It was funny. Yeah. I laughed, but as you say, taking away some of the gravitas of the moment, maybe.
Oh, for sure. I mean, that whole sequence where, yeah, like Armie Hammer's trying to escape in a boat. Henry Cavill's been tossed off the boat and is now sitting in a truck, soaking wet, just eating a sandwich while Armie Hammer's like going around in circles in a boat being shot at. Like, it's very funny. And I mean, the score for this movie and the music choices just give it a lot of energy. And it's just played out in an extended scene of just Henry Cavill just observing. And there's a lot of that in this movie, a lot of montages. And I was wondering if there was real attempts there to, I mean, this is a $75 million movie, which isn't a ton. And I was wondering how much of that was done as a way to work around the fact they couldn't stage extensive, like, big action sequences. Because there's also like a montage invasion of a bad guy's lair that's done all through like split screens and montage cutting. And again, you get around having to stage an extended combat sequence by just showing short clips.
Yeah, that could well have been a good use of editing there. I found that bit a bit odd, but I think that part of the film just felt a bit weird by that point anyway. I felt like I was laughing less. But one thing I found quite interesting was how I almost felt that the two of them together made one whole spy.
Yeah, that's very true. There's a determination, like a real determination to the Armie Hammer character that doesn't really exist as much in the Henry Cavill one, who's a little more, I mean, we get his background in this and that he was like he'd been a soldier in World War II and then became an art thief and drew the attention of the CIA, who basically threatened him with a prison sentence, and now he has to work for them. So he already has a little bit of that rebel attitude. He's a great agent, but he has a little bit of that rebel versus Armie Hammer, who's 100% committed to the cause.
Yeah, he's like, Armie Hammer is little talk, more action, whereas Henry Cavill is basically just quipping his whole way through whilst drinking. You basically might as well give him a vodka martini.
Right, like Henry Cavill has a little more of a James Bond sort of attitude in some ways, like more the Sean Connery James Bond. And believe me, they're trying to evoke that in several points throughout this movie. There's one early on where he's, in the perfect suit, firing a silenced pistol at Armie Hammer, and you're like, that is very Bond. It's almost like an audition for Henry Cavill to play Bond in the future. But you can see more of that style that Sean Connery had, where Sean Connery was in action scenes in these movies, and Henry Cavill is here too. But you get the sense that the action scenes are almost a little bit below them.
Yeah, the kind of too cool for school attitude that comes off the screen sometimes.
Totally, yeah. I mean, that's very loud throughout this movie. And I like that Guy Ritchie, I guess, really locked down on that and brought that entire attitude to the movie. But yeah, the Henry Cavill character really represents that. And that's why he is a good foil for the Armie Hammer, who's, I don't know, would you say Armie Hammer's cool in this movie?
There's a couple of bits where he becomes cool, because for most of the film, Henry Cavill's character is just sort of pointing out his flaws. But then, like, say when they're being followed by the fountain, he's already acknowledged that they're there and he knows everything. He's just not going around shouting about it.
Mm-hmm.
He is quite cool under pressure, which I think, again, that's why I sort of linked to Jason Bourne.
He's not as like demonstrative of his like cool factor. Like Henry Cavill, when that guy walks into a room in this movie, he knows he's the coolest guy in the room, or at least thinks he is. Versus Armie Hammer, who I think doesn't even concern himself with such trivialities.
No, well, that and that kind of goes to the scene where the races, I believe it was. I'm not quite sure where it was set, but he's just going around, flip flopping around the floor and stealing people's jewelry, as if it's all some one big jolly. But there's nuclear weapons at stake here. There are big stakes to be had.
Yeah, I mean that scene with Henry Cavill just wandering around that, I don't know what it is. It's like a tent outside of a car race. But yeah, he just is completely removed from everything that's going on. And it's a fun approach to playing a spy, because so often when we see spy movies, they seem much more actively engaged, versus Henry Cavill, who's almost sleepwalking through the movie. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I just mean the character is almost sleepwalking through these assignments. Apart
from maybe the torture scene and maybe the driving scene at the end, you don't really ever see him break a sweat.
No, and I think it works for the character because that's why he is a good foil, because Armie Hammer, as we see throughout the movie, this Russian agent is borderline homicidal. Like he's constantly having his hand start doing tremors because he's about to snap. And so the idea of him being with a guy who cannot snap, like I don't think anything would make Henry Cavill snap.
Yeah, the tick you mentioned, when I first saw that, I got a Kill Bill flash to the sort of that music cue that Tarantino plays, the dun dun dun.
Yeah.
And I found that a bit of a strange addition, because that certainly wasn't anywhere to be seen in the pilot, obviously, of the TV show from the 60s. Then again, nor was his character particularly.
I mean, we chose to watch the pilot of the Man from U.N.C.L.E. TV show, which Ilya is a very, very, very small part of. I think you could blink and you miss it, basically. So I feel like I can't comment on that character on the show because we didn't get a good sense of who that character is in the many, many, many episodes in which he co-starred.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I got from watching that initial pilot episode was they'd already established Uncle, whereas this film is about bringing Uncle together.
Oh yeah, this is the origin story of Uncle for sure.
Yeah, so you can understand why it doesn't spend the whole episode trying to explain things to you, I suppose. Whereas this film does do a good job of giving you a background of where both of them come from, although I'd say more Henry Cavill's character than Armie Hammer's. You don't really have a montage about his training.
No, you just get that bit where they're sitting at the restaurant. They found out they have to be partners on this case. They don't want to be partners. They've just been in like a fist fight in a bathroom as soon as they encountered each other. But Henry Cavill, basically, just to get under Armie Hammer's skin, starts basically listing off details of his life and kind of taking jabs at him about his mother's questionable reputation in society, the way his father was sent off as an embezzler to the gulag. So you get, I guess, through that conversation, some background on Ilya, but he's definitely not the major character with the big flashbacks and all that. That's definitely the Henry Cavill character.
But then again, the film is called The Man from U.N.C.L.E., not The Men.
That's very true.
I can understand why they would probably lean on one person more than the other, but they are, I would say, co-headliners, co-builders as leads, I would say. I mean, he's second on the call sheet, Armie Hammer, I would have thought.
Yeah, but it's definitely a two-hander here.
Did this film remind you of any other films? Because there's one in my head that stuck out pretty early on, and I couldn't shake it for the rest of the film.
Well, I mean, 1960s Bond movies it reminded me a lot of. Also, some of the way they use split screens and stuff reminded me a lot of the 1960s Thomas Crown Affair, starring Steve McQueen. I think Norman Jewison directed it, and it has a lot of the style that felt like was taken from that movie and brought over here. Did that line up with what you were thinking?
Well, your answers are far more educated than mine were, unfortunately. It reminded me distinctly of the Tom Hardy, Chris Pine film, This Means War.
I was for a second going to laugh if you said something like Toy Story, because Woody and Buzz are friends.
There's a snake in my boots.
Yeah, I never saw This Means War, but the idea of, two spies who are turned against each other and they're both cast with, like, the best looking leading men around. I could definitely see some comparison points for sure.
Well, it's all the sort of try and outspy each other a little bit, especially in that scene where they're breaking into the vault, and just before that, where they're just kind of trying to one up each other. Basically, This Means War is that the entire film, but the stakes are for a girl, not for the safety of the planet. So different strokes, but yeah, the dynamic between the two just reminded me entirely of that film.
To be fair, my education level for This Means War is confined solely to seeing a trailer a couple times.
I think you've probably seen the whole film.
Yeah, well, I guess that's a stay tuned for the future, folks.
I think I might have already got my answer about the NOC List from that film too. Ooh, okay.
Maybe the rewatch will turn you all around.
You never know. Speaking of the cafe scene you mentioned when they were talking to each other, I was convinced that was shot in Battersea Park, and I used to live in Battersea. And so even after the film, I went and looked it up, and turns out it was a completely different park in London. I was quite disappointed because I was so convinced. I went and told my better half, "Come look at this," and even she was like, "I don't think that's right." So,
but you are at this very moment though recording at that actual location.
Yes, Brockwell Park in South London. I'm there now, socially distanced with my microphone. Everyone's just staring at me like, "Who is this guy?"
And Henry Cavill's holding the recorder for you.
Sorry, a little bit closer there, mate. Yeah, cheers.
I mean, I don't know why he's wearing the Superman suit, but, whatever.
He owed me a favor. It was a personal request. Let's not talk any more about it, please.
That's right. I think it's an interesting point, though, to bring up Henry Cavill there, because Henry Cavill, when he appears in this movie, he's done Immortals, that sword and sorcery movie that was really lousy. And he's done The Man of Steel, but this is kind of more of his bid to be a leading man. How did you think he fared as a leading man in something that, a property that doesn't have a built-in audience the way that Superman does?
I think he pulls it off. He can carry a film. I have no doubt in his skills. I mean, I've been on a bit of a Henry Cavill binge accidentally recently. I watched, I think it was, Batman versus Superman recently, and Mission Impossible Fallout recently. So I feel like I've had my fill of Henry Cavill, which is by no means a bad thing. But yeah, to answer your original question, he totally carries his film in my book.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that since this movie, and I guess because it was a bit of a box office underperformer, it doesn't feel like he's gotten a lot of the starring roles to continue, because Mission Impossible Fallout, which I love, a spoiler for the NOC List potentially, but he is a supporting role in that movie. A very prominent supporting role, but he's not the lead. And then also, you look at Batman v Superman, which you named, or even Justice League, which are horrendous movies, but Superman is definitely backgrounded in favor of Batman and Ben Affleck's Batman and Wonder Woman, played by Gal Gadot.
Yeah, now you mention it, he doesn't really seem to have had much as the star. He's co-starring with other people, certainly, especially with Mission Impossible, I would have said. Mm-hmm. But yeah, okay, that's a shame, because I think he was fine. Did you think he was okay too?
No, I really enjoyed him in this movie, and I would have maybe had some doubts about him as a leading man after Immortals, just because that was such a generic performance, and the movie did him no favors, to be fair. But it is interesting that you have these two stars, because Armie Hammer, at this point in time, was also in the position of being pushed as a major leading man, but he put out The Lone Ranger, where he'd start opposite Johnny Depp, and that movie was like a debacle financially. So I think between that and then this, Armie Hammer lost a couple steps. He went in a different direction, though, where he started doing more art house stuff. He popped up in Nocturnal Animals, for example, where he's quite good. He did Call Me By Your Name, the independent drama, which was fantastic, and I think gave him a little more of a boost just in the acting world. So he'll probably show up in more, maybe more layered performances going forward and more dramatic productions. But in terms of the two of them, it seems like this was the point in time where it was kind of a make or break for them as leading men in big budget sort of blockbuster type stuff.
But they may not have hung on as lead men, but they're certainly still getting cast in big films. So I don't think they've done themselves any disservice. They just might not have boosted their film. But then again, this film didn't exactly do well anyway, so who saw it?
Well, exactly. And I mean, I think, they did everything they could. None of the fault of this movie underperforming has anything to do with them. I just think it was the audience really didn't know what The Man from U.N.C.L.E. even meant. And so
it's a bit of a confusing title, I think. I had no idea. I saw the trailer for it and I didn't go to watch it.
Well, it's especially confusing in that this movie's an origin story where he isn't the man from U.N.C.L.E. He's the man from the CIA.
Yeah, it's true.
And then it's not until the end where it becomes the group from U.N.C.L.E. because there's 3 of them by the end with Alicia Vikander as well. So it's not like it's the man from U.N.C.L.E. at the end. It's like, no, it's a trio now.
The people from U.N.C.L.E.?
Or you could just say the trio from U.N.C.L.E., I guess.
Yeah. Now, we've spent about, I don't know, half an hour talking about the 2 male leads. I'd like to sort of pivot on to the female co-stars.
Mm-hmm.
Starting with Alicia Vikander, what did you think?
I mean, she kind of has a little bit of a thankless role, which we've seen a million times, which is in this case, she's the contact they want to use because her father is an inventor who had worked for the Nazis at a certain point and had invented a method of making a bomb that would simplify the use of uranium in the bomb. So you could make nuclear bombs much easier. He's disappeared, so they need her to get to him. And I mean, it's one of those roles we've seen 1,000 times, but I think Alicia Vikander does some really fun stuff with this character because the character is not just going along for the ride. She's on a whole other ride of her own. And I love, she has a flirtation with Armie Hammer. She has to go undercover as his fiance. And she has moments with him that are so bizarre where they're doing awkward dancing. And I mean, Armie Hammer, awkward dancing is always a good thing if you've seen Call Me By Your Name. But she's tackling him and wrestling him. And she's just a real firecracker through the movie. She's really fun.
The original part of the film is obviously when she's being rescued by Henry Cavill's character. Mm-hmm. And you could easily see it falling into the trope of, oh, I'm being saved. Oh, help me. And just sort of being carried through the film. But from that get-go, she's quipping against Henry Cavill and she's putting up a fight the whole way through. And I think the character benefits from, I say, better female writing that we have these days than we certainly did in the 60s era of spy films and spy TV.
Not only that, but you could definitely say that Guy Ritchie didn't have the greatest history of female writing either with his characters. And this really does feel like kind of a pivot point for him. Because I wouldn't say the ones in Sherlock Holmes were particularly well developed. They were larger roles than maybe in something like Snatch or Lock, Stock. But I feel like this was the first time where he really was writing them fun stuff to do. And you'd see that carried, even like Aladdin. Naomi Scott has a lot more to do in that movie than Jasmine typically did. So I think this movie was a good example of Guy Ritchie saying, wait a second, why don't I just make the female characters just as cool as the male characters? That should make a lot of sense to a lot of people, but I think this was a little bit of a breakthrough for him. And I think it's actually helped his movies going forward, at least in that regard, and made the characters more lively.
I could definitely attest to Aladdin and this film. And I haven't seen the Sherlock Holmes films. I know, sorry everyone. But I'm British and I haven't seen a Sherlock Holmes film. It just seems like a backwards stance. But yeah, I'm glad she has the sort of agency in this film, and she has a bit of a pivot later on where she's actually doing stuff for herself. She becomes an agent for the film itself and pushes the story forward. So she is in her own way a lead too.
I was going to say she has agency, but she's working for an agency.
She certainly does, and at the same time, she is fun to watch.
Yep,
she's just funny, and I think this film leans a lot in the humor category, and she's able to carry the scenes herself, really. I mean, you just think about the scene where Henry Cavill and Armie Hammer are arguing with each other about being followed, and she's just there, getting water out of the fountain, just casually, even though she's supposed to be a rich person, with an architect husband, or fiance, I should say. She's doing this weird thing of drinking out of a fountain. It doesn't make a big deal out of it. She just does it, and it's quite funny.
Well, and also, Henry Cavill and Armie Hammer are in a lot of ways very predictable characters. Like, we know how they're going to react to a situation. She's the live wire. She's the wild card that we are never quite sure what she's going to do.
Oh yeah, I mean, from that, as I said, from that get-go at the beginning, you would think she would just be, carried over the line by Henry Cavill, but she's driving the car. She's actually the action scene herself.
Oh yeah. And I mean, you could tell the costumer gave her all the really fun outfits too. For the 60s fashion in this movie is through the roof great, but she gets a lot of the really fun, colorful outfits that are very representative of what I recall from 1960s movies that I've, watched in the past.
Yeah, that bit where she walks out when she's in the shop and she's been dressed for the second time. and she's in that sort of white miniskirt thing with the shoes. That's a great outfit. I mean, to be fair, the whole, as you said before, the whole film is dressed really well. And in terms of the era, how they've shot it, it all fits. It doesn't look out of place. I think it's a stunning looking film, I would have said.
It is. It's a great looking movie. With some exceptions I'll get to in terms of more of the action stuff. But like what I also liked about Vikander was the pairing of her and Armie Hammer, where they have to play this married couple, and the tension they have. Like the movie pulls back on that tension. Like I kind of liked how restrained the movie is. Like they are goofy, they have the wrestling match and all that sort of stuff, but it doesn't feel like the ultra conventional pairing we would get here.
Yeah, you almost feel like it would have been easy just to go Cavill and Vikander.
Right, yeah. Like that's I think what a lot of movies would have done, because the Armie Hammer romance with her is very like awkward and kind of, let's just say it does not reach fruition by the end. It doesn't quite all come together. And so I kind of like that. Like I like the messiness of it. It made it more fun.
It's slightly more real, I would say, as well. You look at Henry Cavill, and when he's with the desk clerk, or she's credited as desk clerk, all he has to do is kind of make a little comment, and then she spends the night in his room. Very classic James Bond getting the girl style. Whereas these two are kind of like real people flirting with each other for the whole film, and most relationships don't come together in 48 hours, and you don't, by the end they don't even have a kiss particularly. And
there is a fun contrast with the Armie Hammer character. He is kind of a cartoon. I mean, he's a guy who's constantly on the edge of like losing his temper, while his hand's always shaking. But then you pair that with the awkward romance, it helps humanize a character that could have been very one note.
Yeah, I think you're right, actually. Out of the two, not to lean back on the two male leads again, but I would say Armie Hammer's character, it feels a bit more fleshed out by the end.
Yeah, I think the movie does more, honestly.
I don't think Henry Cavill gets particularly like a redemption arc or anything.
No, I think, honestly, Armie Hammer gets more fleshed out as a character over the course of the movie than Henry Cavill, who's so aloof a character that I almost don't think you can flesh him out. I don't think you want to, really.
It's got a Han Solo effect almost. You don't want to take the layers off of the onion.
Or the grape.
Or the grape. I've never seen anyone peel a grape before in cinema history, so that was a first for me.
You have now.
Well, there you go.
I thought, I want to jump over to Elizabeth Debicki, who may have been my MVP for this movie. I thought she was a fantastic villain. Like, so much fun.
Yeah, I don't want to say chewing up the scenery, but she's definitely leaning into the character a little bit. Like when she knocks out Henry Cavill and just sort of lays on top of him on the couch and sort of watches him fall asleep. She's got a little bit of a menace behind her as well.
And I like that, she has a husband in this, played by Luca Calvani, who's another villain. I love that he's just kind of an afterthought. She's the one running the show. And her back and forth with Henry Cavill maybe ties a little more into the Bond element, where it is that kind of movie land seduction kind of stuff that happens in spy movies. But it's played like it has a really nice mean edge because of her character. And just scenes where she's bantering back and forth with Henry Cavill are great. And I love how imposing she is, because Elizabeth Debicki she's very tall. She's got to be like 6 feet, 6'1" or something. But they put her in high heels, so she like towers over the scene. Yeah,
she really grabs the sort of screen time that she has in the film. And she's not really introduced until 30, 40 minutes into the film, I would say. Yeah. You see a little picture of her in the dossier, and that's about it. But for the rest of the film, she is someone you look forward to seeing, even though she is the villain.
The second she walks in, you recognize this as a very important character and someone who kind of transfixes the screen, which is a tough thing to do. And Elizabeth Debicki was not a big star at this point. She hadn't done Guardians of the Galaxy and Widows, and she's in Tenet, of course, the Christopher Nolan film. This was very much one of her big coming out party kind of movies. And it definitely announced someone who had a lot of presence when they walked into a room.
I think that's a little bit of kudos again to Guy Ritchie for how he wrote the characters. Because, again, he's playing with the tropes. So we have, obviously, with the two male leads and Alicia Vikander's character all being slightly off what you would expect their characters to be. Debicki's character is the major villain of the film. But she's not mustache twirling at all.
Right.
I would say she's quite cool about the whole thing.
And very, very smart and competent. You have that scene where Henry Cavill shows up and she's like, "Oh, pour yourself a drink. I'm busy." And then he goes, "Oh, you've put something in this. You've drugged me. How do you know I would take this drink?" And she goes, "I didn't. I drugged all of them." And I love that.
Yeah, it shows she actually put a bit of thought into it. It's a shame she didn't just put a bullet in the guy like you think would be the smart plan to do, but I suppose you still need some of those old spy movie tropes to hang around.
Yeah. I thought her big final, death scene was amazing too, with them firing the missile but not telling her until, oh, by the way, we fired that missile 30 seconds ago, and then it lands and just boom. It's such a big, gotcha kind of final moment.
How's that for entertainment?
Oh, that's a great line too.
It is a good line. I'm trying to think of any other characters I want to make a special mention of. Obviously, we get a little appearance from Hugh Grant as the Waverly character, which is sort of the man in charge of the men from U.N.C.L.E, or the people from U.N.C.L E, group of U.N.C.L E. But one cool little connection to one of our previous films is Waverly in the original pilot was played by the actor who plays the professor in North by Northwest. I can't remember the name off the top of my head.
Leo G. Carroll.
That's the one. Which I thought that's a little cool connection there to the past of our past podcasts.
Mm-hmm. Grant, to me in this movie, felt like someone that was being set up to do a lot more in a sequel. So he's only in this movie a little bit. Little bit of a trivia note, though. If you see the movie The Gentleman, Guy Ritchie's recent crime film, which is really fun, actually, there's a scene where Hugh Grant's character is sitting in a Hollywood meeting room, and there's a poster for the man from U.N.C.L.E in the background. So a little bit of an Easter egg for people that want to, see some of Ritchie's other work.
I didn't know that, actually. But I'm glad you mentioned the somewhat of a setup for a sequel. Say that fast 5 times. But I moaned last week that The Bourne Identity felt like it was setting up too much, and I don't like that feeling. So I felt like I should touch on it again. This one does have that feeling at the end, but I don't think it's as heavy-handed, and I believe this one ties up a lot better at the end. It has existed as one film, and it probably will go on as one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, unfortunately, I would have loved more. I think this is a very imperfect first film, but I think you could have improved on it in a sequel. And maybe I'll segue into some of the things that bothered me. Like, I thought this movie had a very odd contrast, almost an annoying contrast sometimes, in the 60s style of the movie and the performances, which we've talked about, and I really did enjoy, with a lot of the action stuff, which is shot in a way that's it almost feels like Michael Mann style, very HD digital look kind of action that I just thought was a jarring combination. Some of it's fine. There's enough character carried through the opening scene where it's Armie Hammer facing off against Henry Cavill's character. But when you had that car chase by the end, which was edited to ribbons, you're losing the energy that was built up between the characters in these action sequences that aren't that impressive.
Yeah, you kind of tapped into that a little bit for me. I couldn't think of how I really wanted to process my thoughts on the action sequences and how it was put together, but especially there was bits of, I would guess, CGI work that felt like I was watching Sin City or something like that. There's
some really bad CG in this movie. A lot of it is backgrounds and things like that, but yeah, you are right. In the action scenes, some of the CG is really clunky, and I mean, this is a $75 million movie, as we've said. So CG, I think they were probably, had limited time and limited resources, but a lot of it is glaring.
Yeah, there's a little bit that sticks out in my head from my couple of watches of this film when Henry Cavill drives the van on top of the boat.
Oh, yeah.
It almost was like someone has cut and pasted the image of the van and just sort of dragged it onto the boat. It looks really unnatural.
I rewound that because I was like, did I just see what I thought I saw? And it's very awkward. It looks almost like a Looney Tunes cartoon.
It just stops in midair and it goes, oh, and then drops down almost, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and the opening chase where you have, so it starts off with Armie Hammer chasing after Henry Cavill and he's making his escape with Alicia Vikander, but they're jumping in a car and there's scenes where the cars are driving, opposite each other and it looks very fake. It looks like a cartoon. And then you're cutting to the actors inside, which feels completely real, back to very obvious CG cars.
Yeah, that definitely stood out. I mean, I'm glad to hear that the budget wasn't that big on the film. It makes me not judge it as harshly now that you've told me how much they spent on it, because it feels like that's how much they spent on it.
Yeah. What did you think of the car chase at the end with Henry Cavill in the off-roader?
It reminded me of a certain Star Trek film I don't really want to mention. But it just felt like it didn't connect. Like it was just chopped together and these like quick zoom out cuts from each shot. I don't know. It just felt like I was watching a video game cutscene.
Yeah, like I was writing in my notes. There are sequences in this movie, like say the torture sequence when Henry Cavill's being tortured and gets out of the situation with Armie Hammer, and then the guy that's torturing them gets burned horribly to death. It's an extended sequence that's super fun. And I was writing in my notes like, Guy Ritchie's really making some interesting sequences throughout this movie. There's some really fun character-driven sequences. But when it comes to the action, I feel like he couldn't assemble a sequence to save his life. Like that car chase in the off-road one, it feels like it's like all these disconnected cuts just pasted together with a lot of digital overview mapping zooms, that it's like basically just to show the geography, but it also looks incredibly phony and like something that was done to kind of connect everything together, kind of paste it together.
Yeah, so you've got these little cuts of the vehicles driving, and then it's basically just CG in between, which I think it would take a lot of viewers away from that moment. You wouldn't feel as connected to the film at that point. I certainly, all those times that we've mentioned, I always felt like I was being pulled out of the film.
Yeah, I did too. Like to me, the action pulled me out of the movie more often because if it was, CG kind of stuff like this, or some of it had an ultra realistic HD Michael Mann look to it, which I'm also like, this doesn't fit this movie. Like this is a fun, soapy 60s spy movie. Like why aren't we doing some slicker, fun action versus something that's trying to look like the Miami Vice remake?
You have to think it must have just been a budgetary constraint.
Maybe. I
It's
mean,
a shame because I feel like this is the main bit that lets the film down for me is those sequences, as you say.
Yeah, because we were talking, referenced earlier Henry Cavill in Mission Impossible Fallout, but when you look at the Mission Impossible films, they're very good at keeping a consistent tone between their character-driven stuff and their action sequences, whereas this movie really the two are butting heads, it felt like a lot of the time.
Yeah, there was definitely a styles clash between those two types of sequences, which I think I don't want to say ruin the film because I enjoyed the film, but it definitely brought it down a few pegs for me.
Yeah, and it also cuts the characters often out of those scenes because it takes this rapid cutting approach to some of the action. You lose the character, and I think the character is what's making the movie so enjoyable. Like I think there's ways. Well, you look at that intro between Armie Hammer and Henry Cavill. A lot of it is character-based. It's Henry Cavill in a car talking to Alicia Vikander. Where is he? Okay, when you hear a pistol sound, go. Like, it's all based on how the characters are interacting, but you lose that a lot of the time in the action. I mean, I referenced earlier the montage where they invade the enemy's base, and it's all done just through split screens and quick cuts. And I mean, I was okay because it spared me an extended, choppy invasion of the bad guy's lair action sequence, but at the same time you lose all the character stuff. You're just seeing Armie Hammer and Henry Cavill as action heroes.
When I saw that scene, I thought maybe they're doing some sort of reference to the opening title sequence of the original TV show, something like that, with the sort of cut together scenes.
Yeah,
and so I allowed it as that, and then when I went to go watch the original episode, none of that actually happens, and the score isn't the same either. So it was just a bit of lazy cinematography, I'd say.
Yeah. One other thing I wanted to just touch on, though, is I thought the movie made good use of a lot of the background to do with the Cold War. I liked all the little history lesson at the start about East and West Germany and how this ties into all the characters and all the obviously this movie deals as well with maybe escaped Nazi figures that have disappeared post World War II. You have this character, Uncle Rudy, who, Alicia Vikander goes to meet with and is a total sadist and is very clearly modeled on Joseph Mengele, the Dr. Death figure, the Angel of Death character from the death camps. He shows a book at one point going through his childhood and then the experiments he was doing in World War II. And I like the way the movie took these real world events and kind of made them into this pulpy story. It's not necessarily the most sensitive of approaches, but I thought it added something. It gave the movie a bit of a distinct flavor.
And I think it added a little bit of grounding for the film in the era it's supposed to be set, because these were real fears that people had at that time.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, this was definitely something that was going on in the atmosphere of the 60s. especially in a lot of the espionage movies of that time. And I think they were smart to double down. Well, maybe they weren't because this movie wasn't a big hit, but I think they were creatively smart to double down on this being a very 60s period piece because it did separate it from things like Bourne and James Bond. And I think that was intentional. I mean, even this movie, there's a lot of gadget stuff and the gadgets are very 60s and malfunctioning. But I thought just like all of this kind of the 60s trappings politically as well as aesthetically really did work very well for the movie.
It's such a shame because this movie feels like it's got so many good things going for it. But there's these glaring problems with things like the action sequences. And I wonder if they had been tweaked, that it might have just been its saving grace at the box office. Because I think otherwise, it's a pretty solid film.
It's a fun movie. And I did have to question how well this movie is really plotted out because there was points where I was like, this is becoming incomprehensible. But Guy Ritchie does that thing he loves to do where suddenly a character references and they go back to flashbacks that fill in something that doesn't make sense. And they do these reveals a lot, especially near the end. There's like 3 or 4 of them in succession. And I was like, are you cheating here, Guy Ritchie? I have real questions about this.
It does have that sort of the last act almost where they're just expositing things on you to try and bring you up to speed on the plot line. Like when Alicia Vikander's character kind of betrays them almost and has to give the whole what she did thing. Whereas you could kind of piece that together yourself with maybe a little bit more information. You didn't need it all to be spelled out for you on the screen.
I mean, it's definitely Guy Ritchie going to his bag of tricks. He did this a lot in the Sherlock Holmes movies where whenever Sherlock would deduct something, you'd get these flashbacks to everything that happened previously. But it's a lot of cheating, I think, on his part just through editing, which, you know what, obviously he doesn't want to, write all this stuff, I guess, and really convey it in a straightforward manner. I think because this movie is so style over substance, it actually works pretty well. I think in Sherlock Holmes, it feels a little more like cheating.
I can't say it threw me out as much as some of the other problems I have with the film. Mm-hmm. I had kind of guessed what had happened in that sequence, for instance. I don't think I needed the whole montage of going back, though. And that did make me kind of, barb a little bit. I was like, ooh, did we need that?
I wonder, though, if this movie is too invested in the villain plot and how labyrinthine it is, because the movie is so focused on just being cool and having fun that whenever it has to explain this overcomplicated plot, you kind of go like, I don't really care. Like, I just want to hang out with these characters. It's the hangout vibe that makes this movie so much fun. But the movie seems fairly determined that this also has to be a very clever, twisty spy story, which, I mean, I get it for the genre, spy story should be twisty, but I wonder if it was necessary, and I wonder if it maybe puts up a little bit of a wall for, say, an audience that might just show up and have fun with the movie.
I mean, you can be twisty without having to confuse people.
That's very true, yeah.
Yeah, and I think there's that duality you mentioned again about the sort of the one side of the film that's got the hangout, campy, quippy factor, and then there's this sort of serious plot that's also going on at the same time, which is basically kind of like our 2 leads again, and again, that duality of the 2 of them. But I think if they just stuck to one of those 2 things, maybe they would have fared a bit better. I mean, the TV show, I mean, I haven't seen all of them. Obviously, we only watched the first one. But I think it walks the line a lot better than the film does.
I got to say, and we'll seg now and maybe just talk a little bit about the TV pilot because we watched this as research, as we said. But I really enjoyed this pilot a lot. Like, I was kind of stunned at how enjoyable I found the show. I thought it might be a very creaky, 1964 attempt at doing a James Bond style adventure on the small screen, but I thought it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I had set it up to have it on, I don't want to say in the background because I was going to pay attention, but I was going to have it on whilst I was eating my lunch.
Right.
So, half of my focus is eating my sandwich or whatever it was.
You were like Henry Cavill. You had classical music on. You're eating gourmet sandwiches.
Exactly. I was sipping my wine. I was really, really enjoying my meal. But it pulled me in.
Yeah, like
I got to say, I might actually go back and watch a bit more.
I thought Robert Vaughn was so charming in this show.
But they're not too much in your face as well.
No, I love that he actually had like a very clear moral line. Like that's something James Bond doesn't have, or some of the other spies of the era. But like Napoleon Solo seems like a really like kind of nice guy who has a very clear, good moral line, but is also just a really awesome spy. And I thought Robert Vaughn pulled off the cool factor really well.
The female character in the pilot is married and has kids. So there's like an initial flirting factor, and it kind of flows throughout the episode. They kind of banter a little bit. But as soon as he knows she's married, he's not really going in for the kill anymore. He even buys presents for the husband and the kid and her family.
Yeah, and then at the end, he's like watching them reunite out the window with kind of a pleasant smile on his face. I was like, I love this guy. I want to hang out with him for more episodes.
He seems like the kind of guy that would turn up to your birthday party and would have got you a really nice present without you asking him, and a really thoughtful present.
Yeah, and there's a whole bit where they go undercover because there's like a industrialist who has an evil scheme, as is so often the case. But just all the undercover stuff of them going to like a gala and him dancing with her and everything, I thought was so much fun and so charming. And I know that when this was shot, they were calling it Solo because at that point it wasn't going to be, a duo show with Ilya, the Ilya character, played by David McCallum. But in the episodes going forward, they'd be more of a pairing. But you get the sense of this pilot of what the tone of the show is, and I thought the tone was really strong right out of the gate. Even the opening with the bad guys breaking in and shooting it like at a mirror, and you see in the mirror Napoleon Solo standing there. I was like, wow, this episode has style, and you could tell that there was money thrown at that pilot as well.
Yeah, it had kind of that Man with the Golden Gun intro thing going on with shooting the glass.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I will say, like when this episode ended, I actually went online on Amazon and I was looking at the pricing of the Man from U.N.C.L.E. box sets.
Me too. I've been looking it up.
I haven't bought one yet, but I'm strongly considering it.
It's quite reasonably priced, the whole set. And there's a movie that they did in the 70s as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, if the Guy Ritchie movie did anything, it convinced me I should probably watch the Man from U.N.C.L.E. TV show, which, Scott and I met through Star Trek fandom, actually, originally. And I'm a huge fan of 1960s Star Trek, the original series. That's my favorite Star Trek. And just watching this show, I was like, oh, man, this is giving me all the same energy and creativity I get from Star Trek episodes. I'm loving it.
Absolutely. And there's a couple of connections there as well. I mean, the theme was written by Jerry Goldsmith.
Yep. And William Marshall shows up as one of the villains in this, and he played Richard Daystrom in the episode The Ultimate Computer.
Yeah, with the M5 computer.
Yeah. So
there was one other small cameo in this pilot episode I wanted to make mention. I wanted to know if you spotted it in him at all. Oh, it sounds like you didn't.
I'm not sure. Who was it?
Let me give you a hint. He's known for his teeth.
Known for his... Oh, Richard Keel.
There we go. Yeah, so in the episode, he's one of the henchmen that's trying to stop Solo from escaping.
Right.
And he's on the screen for all of 5 seconds.
Yeah.
And he does go on to appear again later in the run of the show. But I remember seeing him on the screen and shouting, "That's Jaws! That's Jaws!" And then I had to rewind it just to prove it to my better half.
Right. What did she think of it?
She actually quite enjoyed it too. I think I might have a friend watching it with me on this one. Unlike the rest of these films so far.
Yeah, like I can't really induct the Man from U.N.C.L.E. pilot into the NOC list, but I would if I could.
Yeah, that would probably get a thumbs up from me too. We'll see how the film does when we inevitably get around to watching that.
Yeah, no kidding. So.
Which I think probably leads us on to the question. Cam, The Man from U.N.C.L.E. 2015, does it make the NOC list?
I don't think so. I think it's a charming movie. It's fun. I can totally see people enjoying watching this movie, just thinking it's, kind of a lark, something that they watch, laugh at the actors who are having fun, get maybe a little bit of a kick out of the action, but probably forget the movie after it's over. I can say I saw this movie in theaters, and when I rewatched it last night, I barely remembered next to anything that happened in it other than some key sequences. So I think it's a little bit too trivial for the NOC list, but I do think it's a fun movie.
Yeah, I think you nailed it again on that one. It's a popcorn film.
Yeah.
You can go in. It's an enjoyable hour and 55 minutes. You won't really be disappointed with the film, but it is not one of the best spy films of all time. So from my side, it's also a no. I would actually probably watch this again if I had nothing else going for me and it popped up on my Netflix queue. But there's many, many, many spy films I would choose over this to recommend to people.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. I mean, if you're looking for a modern take on 60s James Bond style, it's a lot of fun. But I think we're going to deal with probably better cases of the lighthearted spy movies going forward, like the blockbuster spy movies. But also, honestly, I would feel really bad if I inducted this, but, snubbed the Bourne Identity.
Yeah, I feel like if I had to choose between those two, I think Bourne would have had a better chance, and he didn't get in. So
Yeah. And so that's kind of the way I feel. But this is not a bad movie. Like, believe me, we're going to have some coming up, I'm sure, where when it comes to the NOC list, it's just you and I laughing maniacally for 7 minutes straight.
Yeah. Is it going to make it? Oh, no.
Yeah, exactly. That's not the case here. Check it out, but I don't think it's all-timer status.
So that's a no from me and a no from you.
That's great. Yeah. So if you want to follow the NOC list, jump on over to Letterboxd, letterboxd.com/SpyHards. We'll actually have the list up there as well as just the overall listing of everything we've covered on the show. So yeah, letterboxd.com/SpyHards.
And with that revelation, the dossier on The Man from U.N.C.L.E. is complete and filed as classified. Cam, what are we doing next week?
We are going back to 1997 and hanging out with Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones in the original Men in Black.
10-year-old me was hyped with this film, and I'm actually quite looking forward to going back and watching it again.
It's been a long time since I saw it, so I'm looking forward to revisiting it as well.
I picked up a Blu-ray copy. I'm quite scared to see what it looks like in Blu-ray.
You never know. I watched Starship Troopers on 4K recently. That movie was made the same year, and I was a little nervous when I bought the 4K because I was like, oh man, I love this movie, but how is that CG going to hold up on 4K? And it actually looked really good, so you never know.
Now, before we wrap up this week, Cam, I do want to throw a bit of love over to our friends at the Mission Impossible podcast. They have a really great show where they're covering the Mission Impossible TV show, the movies, and they're going through and looking at some other spy films as well. And they also come out on the same day as us. So Tuesdays is basically your spy day, where you can get all of your spy podcasts.
So suspend yourself from the ceiling from bungee cords and listen to the Mission Impossible podcast, because you will get into the headspace of Ethan Hunt with the excitement that happens on that show. And I'm really looking forward to going through the actual TV show, because I have not watched the Mission Impossible TV show. And what better way to get introduced to it than through the Mission Impossible podcast?
Yeah, I'm sure we will look back on the Mission Impossible TV show when we go on to cover the franchise ourselves later on down the line, but I'm sure they'll do it a lot better than we will.
It wouldn't be hard.
Wouldn't be spy hard.
That's right.
Now, don't forget to follow us discreetly, of course, at SpyHards, that's SpyHards, on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. But until next week, listeners, good luck among the shadows.